So hello everyone, welcome back to the YouTube channel of Anima Anatomia. Today we will be discussing about hyoid bone, vomer bone, nasal septum and nasal concha. So first I'll start with the hyoid bone. Hyoid bone is a U-shaped structure which is located between the mandible and thyroid cartilage, and it lies at the base of mandible approximately at C3, or we can say cervical third. So as you can see that this is known as mentum, and it is present at the mandible, which is also called chin. So as you move inferiorly, the first protruding structure is known as the hyoid bone. So it is a U-shaped bone structure located between the mandible and the thyroid cartilage. It is the thyroid cartilage, and it lies at the base of mandible approximately at C3, where it acts as a site of attachment for anterior neck muscles. So all the neck muscles that are attached over here like this, it acts as a site of attachment for the muscles. And hyoid is composed of body to greater horns and to lesser horns. So the one which is marked with the green color, it is the greater horn on both the sides, and which is marked with the yellow is the lesser horns that is present on both the sides, and the marked with the red color is the body of the hyoid bone, and it is the most important structure. So body, it is the central part of the bone. It has anterior convex surface and posterior concave surface. I'll mark it that the central part of the bone, it has anterior convex surface and posterior concave surface. Okay, so the greater horns, these are the projections from each end of the body in a posterior, superior and lateral directions, in the posterior, superior and lateral directions, and it acts as a site of attachment for numerous neck muscles. Now coming on to the other part, which is the lesser horns, it arises from the superior aspect of the hyoid bone near the origin of the greater horn. It projects supero-posteriorly towards the stylohyoid process of the temporal bone. Okay, and these stylohyoid ligaments attaches the apex of the lesser horns. Now let's move forward to the vomer bone. So vomer bone is a single thin quadrilateral bone, and it is located along the midline between right and left nasal cavities. So the part which is shown with the blue color over here, this part, it is the vomer bone, and it is present behind the ethmoid bone, and it is classified as flat bone, contributes in formation of bony nasal septum. So these are the bony nasal cavities and viscerocranium. And bony features like parts, it includes that cuneiform part and alae. Surfaces like lateral surface. Borders are anterior, posterior, superior and inferior borders. And landmarks, it includes are the vomerine grooves, vomerine crest of Quana and nasopalatine grooves. Now let's talk about the location of the vomer bone, which is vomer bone is located inferior to the ethmoid bone and medial to the maxilla and inferior nasal conchae. Now let's talk about the articulations of the vomer bone, that it articulates with the sphenoid bone at the spheno-vomerine suture, ethmoid bone as well as with the maxillae and the palatine bone. Now let's talk about the borders, that it comprises of anterior, posterior, superior and inferior borders, in which let's talk about the anterior border, which is the longest border. Mark the longest border, which articulates with the perpendicular plate of ethmoid bone along its upper half. I'll mark it again, with its upper half and nasal septal cartilage along its lower half. Now let's talk about the posterior border, short concave borders which is thickened superiorly and does not articulate with any bone but rather separates the two conchae. About the superior border, it is the thickest border with laterally projecting ala which articulates with rostrum of sphenoid bone and also with the ala which articulates with the three things like sphenoidal conchae of the body of sphenoid from the anterior surface, the vaginal processes of the body of sphenoid from the inferior surface, and sphenoidal processes. The first one was the conchae. This one is the sphenoidal process of the palatine bones. So this was about the superior border. Now let's talk about the inferior border, which articulates with the medial nasal crest of maxilla and palatine bones between incisive canals. So let's talk about the nasal septum now. Both of the bones are finished. So nasal septum consists of both bone and cartilage components. Upper portion of septum formed by perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone. Lower and posterior parts of septum are formed by triangular shaped Vomer bone. Let's repeat it. Upper portion of septum formed by perpendicular plate of ethmoid bone. But lower and posterior parts of septum are formed by triangular shaped Vomer bones. In anterior view of skull, the perpendicular plate of ethmoid bone is easily seen inside the nasal opening as upper nasal septum. In anterior view, like if we are viewing from this part from the anterior side, we can easily see that the perpendicular plate of ethmoid bone is easily seen inside the nasal opening as upper nasal septum, but only small portion of vomer is seen in the inferior septum. So for what we do for a better view, that for a better view of vomer bone, we can see from the posterior nasal cavity with inferior view of the skull from the lower portion, from this portion as it is the sagittal portion from the side view, but from the lower portion, or you can see the posterior portion, we can clearly see that the inferior view of the skull where vomer forms full height of the nasal septum, or you can say about the nasal septum. Now the anterior nasal septum is formed by the septal cartilage. So this one, the one with the that I'll mark with red, it is the nasal cartilage, or you can say the septal cartilage that is present in the nose area. So the anterior nasal septum is formed by the septal cartilage. This is the septal cartilage, a flexible plate that fills in the gap between the perpendicular plate of ethmoid bone and vomer bone. And this cartilage also extends outward. So this protruding structure or outward structure uh, separates the right and left nostrils, and this septal cartilage is not found in dry skulls. So let's talk about the nasal conchae. So it is the projecting out of the lateral walls of nasal cavity and are curved shelves of bones. They are called conchae, or you can say turbinates. Turbinates is the other name for conchae, and its function is to increase the surface area of the nasal cavity, which increase the amount of inspired air that comes into contact with the cavity walls. As there is the more the surface area, more the amount of air that we inspire goes in, and it disrupts the fast laminar flow of the air. So as soon as we know that the fast laminar flow of air is disrupted, means inhibited, the more so air becomes slow and turbulent. Okay, and so as soon as the air becomes slow and turbulent, the more time or the longer time it spends in the nasal cavity, which helps in getting the air humidified, so that the air gets humidified. So basically there are three conchae: inferior, middle and superior, in which the projects into the nasal cavity, which forms a four pathways for the air to flow inside, and these four pathways are called meatuses. Okay, these four pathways are called meatus. So these four pathways are called meatuses, and the which of them are inferior meatus. This is the inferior meatus, the middle meatus, the superior meatus, in which the one marked with the yellow are the meatus, and other than that the blue markings are the conchae. So blue marking is the superior concha, and one which is marked with the yellow is the superior meatus. So let's talk about the four pathways or the meatus, and these are the inferior meatus, middle meatus, superior meatus, and sphenoethmoidal recess, in which I'll show you that this is the superior meatus. This one I'll remove the marked areas. The one marked, this is the superior meatus, the middle meatus, and the inferior meatus. One is not present, which is sphenoethmoidal recess. And so let's talk about the location of the inferior meatus. It is present between inferior concha and floor of nasal cavity. So this is the inferior meatus present here, and it is present between the inferior concha. As you can see, this is inferior concha, so this is also inferior concha. It is present between inferior concha and floor of nasal cavity. Now let's talk about the middle meatus, which is present inferiorly or in between inferior and middle concha. It's quite clear from the diagram that it is present between middle concha and inferior concha. I'll mark with the black. This is inferior concha and this one is the middle concha, and it is present, so the middle meatus is present between middle concha and inferior concha. Now the superior meatus, which is present between middle and superior concha. So the middle, this one is the middle concha, and again the superior concha. This one is the superior concha. Last one is the sphenoethmoidal recess, which is present superiorly and posteriorly to the superior concha. This is the superior concha, as we can see, and the superior sphenoethmoidal recess is present between superior and posterior, backward on the backward portion, present between superior and posteriorly to the superior concha. That's all from today, and that's about the vomer, hyoid, nasal concha, and nasal septum. So that's all. Thank you for listening, and do subscribe to the YouTube channel of Anima Anatomia.